This is Bill Brady on the Pulse of Arizona, 1100 KFNX. Derek Hanley is with us today, and he's done a book that should be a coffee table book in homes and offices. You know, it's something in the office that somebody's going to pick up, look at, and be moved by. This is the book. It is called Photos from the Front Lines, a year on the streets of Alameda County, and that year was 2020 when we all were dealing with COVID. Derek, good to have you with us on KFNX. Thank you for joining us today.
Bill, it's my profound honor to be with you, and I look forward to speaking on this book.
Now, what do you have been a combat medic. What prompted you to do this book?
You know, I have been a kind of an amateur photographer for many years. Growing up, you know, my mom and my uncle who lived next door, he was a photographer in World War II in the Pacific Theater, and so I kind of grew up around this stuff and did it on my own. And then when I was in the military, that's when, you know, this is before cameras were on cell phones, so cameras were small enough to fit in your pocket. So I got a small camera and brought it with me in the field, and, you know, you see some crazy stuff as a paramedic. And so just kind of documenting for my own personal sake and maybe to teach my students and stuff like that. But when COVID hit, this job took on a different tenor. You know, it's already extremely stressful. It's already extremely traumatic for the folks who have to do this. But then to have every potential patient or every potential call now be potentially life-threatening, not only for you, but for your family and your friends and, you know, those who you're closest to. That's something that was kind of unique about this time and this battlefront, if you will. And so started off innocently enough, but I wanted to make sure that I was out there and kind of capturing these stories that otherwise would not have been told of the heroism of these folks out there in the streets.
On the COVID subject, I think a lot of people look at it from and I don't mean this in a nasty way, but in a self-centered sense. They know what their life is like. They know what they do for work. They know what their exposure is. But they're not really thinking of paramedics, the EMTs that are out there that could be courting contact with COVID on every call.
Every call, and you don't know. And then early in the crisis, PPE was extremely limited as well. So these folks, you know, we didn't know much what was going on. We didn't know too much about the virus itself. Information was extremely limited early on. And unfortunately, so was the personal protective equipment that these folks need to keep themselves safe. And, you know, safe is also a relative term in that, you know, masks and things like that aren't a guarantee that you're not going to catch this thing. So early on, you know, they were rationing N95 masks. They would, you know, each time someone had a call, which was a potential patient, which everyone potentially was, but when someone was exhibiting symptoms similar to that, they would, a captain would come after the call, collect their mask, put it in a bag, and then bring those bags back to the station. They would sit for a week until the virus was dead, and then they'd reissue them to these folks. So, I mean, you can't understand the stress level that these folks were under, you know, ordinarily under extremely stressful, but then to have not even the gear that you need to keep you safe against this invisible threat.
They are really our heroes, I cannot emphasize that enough, because stuff happens in this life, whether it's automobile accidents or a heart attack. And you call 911, and these folks show up, whether it's 2 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And as you say, there is that regular level of stress, but then you add the overlay of COVID to it. There's one picture in the book where one of the paramedics, his mask is broken, and he doesn't have another mask.
He doesn't have another mask, and that's the picture you're referring to is Jesse. He's a paramedic friend of mine. We became friends on a ride-along I did out there with the field, and he's normally a very, very calm, very centered, super chill dude. And that was the first time I've ever seen him, you know, frustrated, anxious, you know, just kind of in that pent-up state, because he's like, this person's I'm in the back, I'm trapped in the back with this person for 20 minutes on the way to the hospital. my mask breaks and they're sitting here coughing and hacking and, there's nowhere to go. He's confined. And so I was glad I was able to kind of capture that look on his face, because it says it all as far as, because this is also, we're talking weeks, maybe even months into this fight. And, that's why I intentionally used military vernacular in this book to try to conceptually tie these two professions together in people's minds, being, military and medics, because outside of those two professions, I'm not sure what other career fields you can find where people have that high level of traumatic exposure as medics do. And the military gets thanked for it, and they get recognized, and they get taken care of, their health care, their education. And, there's a good saying I heard recently, which is, the military protects us overseas. First responders are the one who protects us at home. And so I want people to think about things in terms of that, and thinking about, man, these folks, what can we do to take care of them? How can we make sure that they, live long, happy lives? Because, you can't not see some of the things that you see in this job.
Well, they certainly are paramilitary at the very least. The other thing, I don't know if you've investigated this aspect of it, but the other thing is a lot of them work for private companies and not necessarily for the county or the city in certain places. Do those folks get benefits? Do they get pension credit and things like that?
That's the unfortunate part about emergency medical services nowadays, is a lot of it being privatized. And, you can go kind of either way as far as benefits of that. I think the main benefit that municipalities see is cost savings, because if it's privatized, then, the citizens, the municipalities don't have to cover things like pensions and stuff like that. And unfortunately, when, business is simple, right? You have income and you have expenses. And if income isn't what you need it to be, then you have to cut expenses. And oftentimes where that comes is at the sake of the medics, the ones on the streets, and also the patients. So I think that emergency services could be doing a much better job as far as being proactive about taking care of the mental health of the field providers, because, obviously they have their health insurance and they have their doctor and, things like that, and employee assistance programs and whatnot. But I think that we could be doing a much better job, because burnout is huge in this career field, as is turnover and whatnot. And, medics are almost treated like they're disposable. We'll use them for 5 years till they burn out, and then they're out on their own. And I would like to see people having, good, solid mental health and, longevity in this career field and also in their lives, because suicide is a huge problem with the first responder community as well. So I think all emergency services, whether paid or private, should really think about being a lot more proactive and what they can be doing for their providers who are grinding it out there.
Amen. Derek Hanley is with us. He has, yes, you have written this book, but you've really produced this book in the sense of the photographs and the narrative that it provides. The name of the book is Photos from the Front Lines, A Year on the Streets of Alameda County by Derek Hanley. Derek, we're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, I will telegraph the question here. Who are these people who are paramedics and EMTs, and what is their calling? Because they're doing really very difficult work, very emotionally moving work in a good and bad sense. We will continue with Derek Hanley in just a moment. Photos from the front lines, A Year on the Streets of Alameda County. We'll be back. Bill Brady on the Pulse of Arizona, 1100 KFNX. We are back. Bill Brady on the Pulse of Arizona, 1100 KFNX, a remarkably compelling book called Photos from the Front Lines, A Year on the Streets of Alameda County written and photographed by Derek Hanley. Now, I want to emphasize something here. This is a book with a lot of pictures. It really takes you right onto the streets of Oakland, which is the largest city in Alameda County, but into all of Alameda County, which also includes some relatively rural areas. Derek, I want to ask this question right up front because these are interesting people. In looking at the book, there are a lot of young people in the book. There are a few older people in the book. For instance, Jim, who we meet on a call in Livermore. But most of them are, unless they're in supervisory positions, they're relatively young people. What is the calling that brings these people to this job? And you had mentioned burnout and suicide and things like that. Do people really rotate out of this after a period of time because it's just so heavy?
100%, Bill, 100%. It's staggering to me that people are able to stay in this career field for more than a few years. I mean, to do that is a testament to their, psychological flexibility and well-being and, self-care. It must be, because this is a hard job. And as you noticed, a lot of the folks who are in this career field are fairly young. And a lot of times, at least in, this particular service, ambulance service, and it's common across the country, a lot of folks are using EMS maybe as a stepping stone to something else. Maybe they need a couple years or clinical hours for med school, or maybe they're trying to get on with the fire department, or, things like that. EMS, to some is a career, to some is a stepping stone. So that's why we see that kind of young crowd. And then there's turnover because of those factors. They get hired on with a department, or they get a flight medic job, or, they're moving up onto something else. But that's not to say that even in a short period of time, you cannot collect a lot of traumatic exposures, especially working in a big, gritty city like Oakland. You're going to see a lot of trauma, and you're going to see a lot of horror and sadness. It takes a special person to be able to do it. And a lot of people are drawn to this career field, I think, for the desire to help others. I think that's the core of why anyone does any of this stuff. I mean, why would you be in this job? You can't. If you don't care about helping people, there's no way you're going to do it. So that brings them to the table. And then from that point, they kind of branch out to other places. But if they stay in it, they're going to need to be proactive with their self-care, because it's a heavy burden that these folks have to carry for the rest of their lives with a lot of the stuff that they have to see and do in this job.
They really have to have the right psychological makeup, and I mean that in the sense that not only do they have to care, but they also have to be able to put it in perspective, to be able to keep doing it day after day, year after year. Now, Derek, I think it's safe to say that if you and I sat there and watched the news together any night in Phoenix, that on anything that's a crime, an accident, things like that, that the paramedics are going to be there. When the calls come in a place like Oakland, for instance, when the calls come in, what types of calls are the paramedics going out on in terms of following up on these calls?
I mean, any sort of major accident, cardiac arrest, shooting, those are some of the kind of big, heavy ones that come across that, kind of make you go, uh-oh, when you're on your way, or you hear about that you're being dispatched to it and things like that. There's also just the kind of just sad calls where, you show up and, someone's choking on their dinner because they have throat cancer and they can't keep anything down. You have to bring them to the hospital to get, things sorted out, and you're dealing with the family and, things like that. So there's stuff like that, but then there's also the good calls too. I mean, I would say on balance, there's more kind of depressing and traumatic things that you have to deal with, but there are those ones that balance things out when you are able to, be there at that critical second to save someone's life or make a difference in this person's life, or turn them around from being an opioid addict, with a conversation on the way to the hospital. There's those little glimmers in this job that I think are what keep people going and are able to, even though they may be less frequent, the impact that they have is more profound to kind of counterbalance some of the dark things that you have. And the other thing I'll talk about, Bill, is I think one of the things that you need in order to maintain in this job is a sense of humor. And I hope that I was able to kind of communicate that in the book as well. Some of those moments of levity where the crew is able to cut loose and laugh. And, that's one of the things I enjoy most about being on an ambulance is just the conversations and, the jokes and the kind of dark sense of humor that medics have. Because when you see something awful, you have kind of two choices, laugh or cry. And, I think the ones who kind of have the longevity are the ones who choose to laugh.
Is there what appears to be indifference on the part of the EMTs and the paramedics, but that really isn't indifference? It is just them dealing with the job and the situations in a way of protecting their own emotional survival?
100%, Bill, 100%. You need some level of emotional armor, I'll call it. You need some clinical distance, you can call it, between you and what's happening. One of the hardest things, if I'm honest, is having an emergency with someone that you know or someone that you care about, because you can't really, it's hard to erect that emotional barricade that you need in order to maintain objectivity, focus on the job, focus on, what the presenting symptoms are, and do what you need to do to save their life or help them get to the hospital, kind of a thing. So you need that emotional armor, and you can see it on the faces, especially of the veterans who've been doing this stuff, 10, 20 years. You can see it. But that being said, what I will say is that, because that's the kind of initial impression that you get when you look at these folks, or you meet them, they're kind of grizzled, you're kind of, maybe a little standoffish to people they don't know initially. But when the chips are down, the compassion is still there. That's one of the things that kind of struck me when I was out there, because it's like, man, it's easy to get grizzled. It's easy to get burnt out. It's easy to get jaded. Are these folks going to be able to maintain that core compassion? And that's exactly what I saw. These folks, despite having all the stuff they've seen, all the stuff they have to do, doing this job day in and day out, when they show up for that patient, I see them give them 100% of not only their mind and their talents, but also their heart. And that was one of the most profound things I think that I saw out there.
Derek Hanley is with us. His book is called Photos from the Front Lines, A Year on the Streets of Alameda County. Derek, the aftermath of when there are things that are somewhat predictable, automobile accidents, for instance, and people having heart attacks and things like that. Those are not joyous occasions. But in the aftermath of stuff where maybe the paramedics roll up on a mass shooting, for example, how do they recover from that? How do they deal with that when they see more bloodshed in a single incident than most people will see in a lifetime?
That's a great question, Bill, and I think that is a very individual thing for the person. I think there's a lot of factors that go into how someone deals with, extreme trauma. And some of it, I think, has to do with, how you're raised and how you process information and deal with, and, how you were kind of shown by those who raised you how to deal with stressful situations. Some of it, I think, is your own self-care regimen. Are you doing the things that you enjoy that can help you to diffuse some of this tension, whatever your hobbies, things like that may be. Also, how engaged are you in, your healthcare? Are you seeing a therapist? Are you working with a psychiatrist if you're having, issues and stuff like that? There's multiple factors, I think, that go into, how someone processes this stuff and, how someone maintains longevity. As for myself, I can speak to one of the stories that was in the book, which wasn't really covered because, part of my gig as a photographer out there in the field is I need to maintain, the privacy and the dignity of the patients, these folks are showing up to treat. And there was one where we went on the scene of a shooting in Oakland, and I I took a couple pictures as we were coming in, and you can see kind of the blood trail on the ground leading to where the victim was. And I stopped taking photos because I didn't feel right, as a person, as a kind of journalist to continue to document it. But that call hit me hard. I wasn't even involved in the care of the patient. I was just more of an observer. But that one hit me hard, mostly because the family was present during the resuscitation attempt. And that's something that's interesting that I think people don't think about when it comes to like a cardiac arrest, is at least in Alameda County, they will stay on scene. They'll stay in the person's house and be doing the CPR and the shocking and the medications and the intubations. They're doing all the interventions in the person's house, which means that whatever family happens to be there is witnessing this all. And you're getting to hear, their screams and their cries and all this stuff while you're trying to focus on doing your job and trying to save this person's life. And I know for me, it took me maybe a day or so, but I remember just being in the shower and just tears were just starting to just rain down, just kind of having empathy for that family and that wife who, had to watch her husband, be declared dead in front of her.
Raw stuff, and it is real life. This stuff does happen. We hear about it on the news. It just doesn't usually happen to us. And so the paramedics, however, are on the opposite end of the spectrum. They're witnessing a full range of trauma that exists in this life. And as you mentioned, it can be highly emotional. Derek Hanley is with us. He is the author of a book called Photos from the Front Lines, A Year on the Streets of Alameda County. We will continue with Derek in just a moment. Bill Brady on the Pulse of Arizona, 1100 KFNX. This is Bill Brady on the Pulse of Arizona, 1100 KFNX. The name of the book is Photos from the Front Lines, A Year on the Streets of Alameda County, written and photographed by Derek Hanley, who is a combat medic and who spent a year with paramedics and EMTs on the streets of Alameda County in California, Oakland being the biggest city. If you were someone who enjoys this, I wouldn't call it true crime, but it certainly takes you into what I would refer to as the paramilitary services, like the police and fire, and the paramedics and the EMTs. This is a very compelling book. You can get it at dohp.net, and that is Derek O. Hanley, and then P for Productions, for example, .net, dohp.net, also available via Amazon. It is a really compelling book. Derek, I want to go to something here. My effort here in working with your wonderful documentarian book is to help bring it to life for people and to help people to see the things that you were witnessing the way the paramedics see them. The thing that strikes me is, in the course of most people's lifetime, they may go to the emergency room a couple of times, they may go to the doctor, but it's not trauma, or hopefully isn't heavy duty trauma. But the paramedics are dealing with people in a very intimate fashion, and I'll let you put it into your own words, but I'm looking at it from a standpoint of somebody's going down the highway, there's an accident, they didn't think there was going to be an accident, and all of a sudden there is someone that they don't know treating them, critical to their life and survival. That's heavy.
Extremely heavy. It's a huge burden, and part of me is hoping that the photos in the book will help to communicate some of the pressures that these folks are under. And that's, when you tell someone, Bill, that you're a paramedic, the standard response is, oh, you drive the ambulance, right? And, yes, while that is a factor of the job, the more compelling fact is that, when there's an emergency and, someone's life is crashing, you're by yourself in the back of a moving vehicle trying to render these interventions that are normally done in an emergency room setting with, a trauma team and physicians and nurses and everyone around. You're limited on light. You're limited on space. You're limited on time. There's so many factors that go into saving someone's life when it's a critical patient that that's what I'm saying. The pressure on these folks is unthinkable unless you've been in that situation. And even as an observer, the pressure is huge, but you still don't experience it and embody it the way that the person whose responsibility is to save this person's life. And that's the thing as a paramedic is when you show up, there's no one else higher care that you're going to call as backup. You're it. So if you don't do what it takes, this person's life could suffer, and then the family and things like that. So hopefully this book will show some of that pressure and help people to have empathy for these folks, and then, a little bit more respect for what they do, because, after that, as you're saying, there's the pressure of the call itself, and then you have the aftermath. You have to, process these things that you've seen and smelled and experienced. And, how does one do that? It's a lifelong process, and it's a day by day kind of thing. And, I have such respect for anyone who can lace up their boots and continue to do this job after seeing what they've seen and doing what they do, because they are heroes, in my opinion.
Without a doubt. And I want to emphasize a point in a moment, but I want to remind people that Derek Hanley is with us. He's the writer and photographer for a very compelling book called Photos from the Front Lines, A Year on the Streets of Alameda County. Derek, it would occur to me that there are a couple of things that people should recognize, that the paramedics are, the EMTs, paramedics, they're not the people who are in the controversial position, the sense of you can have a police shooting and obviously there's going to be controversy over whether the police shooting was necessary. For example, there are arrests that police officers have to make that are ugly. But the paramedics coming on a scene of a car accident or coming into somebody's home with cardiac arrest, they are people who are really being welcomed into that scenario. They're not the controversial part of it. Do people see that distinction?
I think for the most part they do. But Bill, I'll tell you what, this job is not free from conflict. There are people who are not happy when you show up. And there's folks who won't let you in their home when someone in the home has called, 911 for them. Or maybe they're having, they have a rough life, they've been having a bad day, now they're experiencing an emergency, and, you're the closest person that they can vent their frustrations to. And so they take out, all that on you as the paramedic. And so by and large, sometimes people are happy to see you, but there is still, I've been yelled at on Thanksgiving by a citizen for where I parked my emergency vehicle. There's people kind of do crazy things at times, especially when there's emergency situations. But that being said, yes, in general, paramedics don't have to face a lot of the controversy that police and maybe other first responders may in the eyes of society.
In the aftermath of something, and I cannot imagine that any paramedic or EMT wants to lose a patient, but in the aftermath of something like that, what happens when they walk back to the vehicle, when they're alone in the vehicle with the other EMT or paramedic? How do they deal with that?
Again, it's a very individual thing. And, for each call that you go on, you have to document what happened, either, on a written report or on a computer-based report. So a lot of times what you'll do is do a debriefing. So you get back with your partner and you're kind of like, man, that was crazy. What could we have done better? What did we do well that we can carry into another call? And you kind of have an informal debrief. There's also a lot of times, as it may be, like I said, humor. There's a lot of dark humor in the emergency services, especially with medics. And, sometimes you may find something that was funny about the call, and you can kind of diffuse the tension a little bit with a joke or with a laugh, and that type of a thing. So another thing is that you're kind of processing the call as you're writing your report. So there's that kind of written processing bit to it, but there's also when you get home, that's as they say, the walls start closing in, and when you're by yourself and you don't have the kind of distractions of work or the next call or driving home, that's when things start. At least for me, anyway. I'm speaking on my own experiences. A lot of times I would maintain that kind of emotional armor during my shift. And then once I got into my car and was alone and was kind of on my way home, that's when a lot of the emotional bits would kind of surface. And I can't tell you the number of times, I would drive home from work just bawling, just crying my eyes out because of what I had to see and witness and whatnot. And that's me. And it took me a while to be able to seek help and to take care of myself, engage in self-care. I know that's kind of a newer buzzword over the last couple of years, and that wasn't really a thing when I was a younger medic. But yeah, I mean, there was every medic gets asked the question of what's the worst thing you've ever seen, or what's the worst call you've ever been on. And for me, it was seeing a tractor trailer which crossed the median of a highway and impacted several cars going the opposite direction, and basically completely obliterated them. And when I got home that night from that, I didn't feel anything, Bill. I didn't feel a single thing, and that to me was my red flag, my warning alarm that, hey, what's going on here? We need to think about my psychological well-being. I need to start paying attention to this stuff. And it wasn't until a couple of years after I got out of the field and was in the National Guard that actually one of the majors I served with actually had me go to the VA and get involved with a therapist, and that kind of started my healing journey, if you will, to where I am now.
This is Bill Brady on the Pulse of Arizona, 1100 KFNX. Derek Hanley is with us. He is the writer and photographer of a great documentarian photo book called Photos from the Front Lines, A Year on the Streets of Alameda County. Derek, I have used the word heavy today more than I have, I think, in the last quarter century, but that is a word for it. We'll come back and continue with Derek Hanley in just a moment. Bill Brady on the Pulse of Arizona, 1100 KFNX. We are back. Bill Brady on the Pulse of Arizona, 1100 KFNX. Derek Hanley is with us today. He is a unique individual, combat medic, as well as an EMT paramedic on the front lines, as the book is entitled Photos from the Front Lines, A Year on the Streets of Alameda County. Derek, as I work to help you tell your story here, and certain thoughts come to mind. People complain about their taxes. Nobody loves taxes, but this is one of those services that's a utility. When something happens, when you have a relative with chest pains or you happen to come upon an accident that's just occurred, you dial 911 and you expect the service to be there. If you could speak a little bit to, in the case of Alameda County, and this is just one county in the Bay Area, there's also Contra Costa County, and of course here we have Maricopa County, which is a massive county. LA County is the biggest county in the country. But what is the size of this apparatus that needs to be maintained 24/7, 365. I was even watching somebody clean a stretcher with what looks like some sort of cleaning solution like Windex, and I thought to myself, somebody has got to manage the fact that there's Windex and paper towels in every one of these in every one of these vehicles. It's mind-boggling.
It is mind-boggling, Bill. It's a huge apparatus. And there's so much stuff that happens behind the scenes as well. There's a section in the book where I feature the mechanics who work on the ambulances. I mean, think about the wear and tear that comes from driving a vehicle at top speed everywhere it has to go for 12 hours a day, every day. So these are the folks working behind the scenes to keep the wheels turning, to make sure that the medics can even show up to these calls. And as you put it, it's an expectation. Could you imagine if you called 911 and the medics didn't show up? What were you going to do then? I mean, it's staggering to think about if we did not have this ability. And in Alameda County, it's huge. I mean, it's there's over 200 or 300 paramedics that work just in the county alone. And, you're talking hundreds and hundreds of calls, emergency calls per day, a lot of them extremely critical. And, it's a lot to manage. Then you have the dispatchers. Another kind of unsung hero of the first responder community are the dispatchers, the ones who have to take the calls and, deal with people who are panicking and try and get the relative information that they need to send the first responders there to try to help. There's so many facets that are involved in emergency services. And you mentioned, the tax situation. Now, when I was in the Air Force working as a medic, I also was a volunteer firefighter on the outside the base. I was stationed in San Antonio, Texas, Blackland Air Force Base, and I was a volunteer firefighter there. And Texas has very low taxes, which is what attracts a lot of people, and people like that. However, I will say that from my personal experience, the first responders, the emergency services suffer greatly when they don't have the funding from the public. Now, we were a very small volunteer fire department. We covered 100 square miles of rural Texas area, and we were using the silver firefighter uniforms that the Air Force were getting rid of. We were using secondhand aircraft grade firefighting equipment because we had no money to buy new stuff for the folks. And so, people like to bristle at taxes, and, I don't like to pay exorbitant taxes either, but those taxes, pay for emergency services, and you get what you pay for. And for me, I want the person who's going to be showing up if I'm having an emergency, or my wife or my nephews, to be the best trained, the best equipped to be able to try and save their life.
This is Bill Brady on the Pulse of Arizona, 1100 KFNX. Derek Hanley is with us. He is the writer and photographer for a compelling book called Photos from the Front Lines, A Year on the Streets of Alameda County. Derek, you spent a year out there, and you, of course, spent a career in terms of being a medic, an EMT. What was the worst thing that you saw in the year that you were out there?
I'll give you two examples, Bill. I mentioned one earlier that we had a shooting call in Oakland, and when we got to the scene, we were one of the first responders there. The police and fire department were also just arriving, and a lot of times with emergencies, the police and fire department will be there first before the ambulances because there are more of them and they are more closely dispersed. Ambulances are usually kind of more spread out, and so we were one of the first people there, along with the police and fire. And, once the police said that the scene was safe, because we don't make entry into an unsafe scene because we have no body armor. We have no weapons to protect ourselves. But we were there pretty much right after, as soon as we could possibly be. And as we were coming up, you could see the blood trail from the parking lot leading towards where the patient was located. And it wasn't like, oh, there's a drop of blood and there's another drop. It was like spurt, spurt, spurt. And so we were, as medics, we're calculating in our mind how much blood this person is losing every second, and it's not looking good. And so we get to the apartment, and again, I didn't take any photos of this out of respect for the patient and their family, and as a journalistic integrity. But the thing that struck me about that is the family was there, and they were witnessing the rescuers attempting to resuscitate this person, and the screams of the wife, calling out her husband's name as she's watching the medics do CPR on him. That's haunting. That's never going to leave me. And that was a hard one for me to deal with personally. And I wasn't even involved in the patient's care, just someone who was witnessing it. It struck me, and it took me a little while to be able to express that. Like I said, I had tears in my eyes the following night when I was, in the shower, just kind of when it all hit me. And that was a rough one. The other one that really stands out for me that was tough was when there was the major George Floyd protest in downtown Oakland in May of 2020. And the medics, the tactical medics were called up because anytime there's kind of a dangerous situation in the county, tactical medics assemble, and they at least have, helmets and body armor and things like that to protect themselves. But we were at the major protest, and there happened to be two federal security officers who were shot at the federal courthouse in Oakland, just a few blocks away from where the protest was located. And so the tactical medics were able to respond and get to the scene super quick, and two ambulances took the two officers to Highland Trauma Center, which is only about 5 or 10 minutes away from the downtown area. But unfortunately, the medics who worked on the more critical officer were unsuccessful in their attempt to resuscitate him. His wounds were fatal. And one of my friends paramedic friends from the ambulance service, Chris, he's a combat veteran, and we connected with that on that level when I started working there. And then he was the medic who was in the first ambulance who lost the officer. And to see, because he's a joking guy, he's the life of the party kind of a person, to see the change on his face after walking out of the hospital after losing that officer it struck me so deeply. And in that moment, I was so conflicted as to whether to photograph and document this moment. But I made the decision to shoot a picture of him being comforted outside the hospital. And to me, that's one of the things that's kind of burned deep into me too, is that look on his face of just kind of sadness and loss. And hopefully that picture is able to communicate what he was feeling to the viewer.
The gravity of the situation that you almost can't put into words. The picture viscerally captures the whole thing. Derek Hanley is with us. He has written and photographed a book called Photos from the Front Lines, A Year on the Streets of Alameda County. Derek, we have about a minute left here, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to this emergency medicine dimension and the work that these people do, and how the public should really view and appreciate these folks who are literally there when they press the button.
Yeah, Bill. I mean, thank you so much for A, recognizing the significance of this book, and B, giving me the platform to be able to talk about it. And I just want the public to know that paramedics, medics I use for EMTs and paramedics, the shorthand, these folks see a lot and they have to do a lot, and they're there on a moment's notice. And as we take care of those in the military who have to see horrible things and, experience trauma as a result of their chosen profession, we take care of them. So what can we do to take care of those medics who are out there day after day, night after night, on the streets 24/7, keeping everyone safe? That's the question that I hope my book produces in the general public.
Well, they're certainly going to get a very good series of snapshots of what you saw and what is happening out there. I thank you very much for your time today. The name of the book is Photos from the Front Lines, A Year on the Streets of Alameda County. But you could very easily just scratch that out and put Maricopa County in there, or Pima County, or Los Angeles County. This is happening everywhere, and there is, thank God, an army of folks to deal with what happens. Derek, thank you again. Best of luck with the book. People can get the book by going to dohp.net. That is your personal website, dohp.net. Or Amazon also has it, but I hope people will buy it. It is a very compelling book, and anybody who picks it up will not put it down. Thanks, Derek.
Bill, it's been my profound pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. Photos from the Front Lines, A Year on the Streets of Alameda County, written and photographed by Derek Hanley. Bill Brady on the Pulse of Arizona, 1100 KFNX.